if one looks at the way this phrase analytic philosophy is used, it's really just a term for a tradition in philosophy, a tradition which we can trace back to philosophers such as Frege, Russell, and more, and people belong to that tradition because of their historical connections, who they were taught by, who they read, who they interact with, and so on. It's not a particular philosophical theory or even a particular philosophical method, because when you look at all the people who are classified as analytic philosophers, there are enormous differences between them. I mean, if you think about, let's say, the later Wittgenstein on the one hand and Rudolf Carnap on the other, or David Lewis, whom we were talking about earlier, there's very little that these people have in common. So I don't think that one should be trying to formulate some essence in terms of doctrine or method that makes somebody an analytic philosopher. And there's good analytic philosophy and there's bad analytic philosophy. The part of analytic philosophy, or the type of analytic philosophy that I identify most with, is a tradition which does put significant weight on the use of logic and formal methods, and which, in a broader sense, takes a scientific attitude to philosophical questions, rather than, let's say, a literary or a religious attitude. And it's also a tradition in which common sense plays some sort of part, so that, as it were, madness is not regarded as a particularly positive quality. But I don't want to make that a definition of analytic philosophy. And of course, analytic philosophy is not something radically new. It's a way of doing philosophy which is quite clearly present in all sorts of philosophers of the past, such as Aristotle and Leibniz. No, certainly not, because it's what makes it analytical philosophy is simply the fact that it's in a certain tradition, but it's possible to be in that tradition and to write rubbish. There's plenty of that around. Well, the phrase "the linguistic turn" is one that was popularized by Richard Rorty for a very broad trend in late 19th century and 20th century philosophy, on which philosophical questions were regarded as, in some sense, linguistic or conceptual questions. Of course, it's not very clear what's meant by saying that they're linguistic or conceptual questions. Sometimes it seems to be something to do with them being questions about language or concepts. Sometimes it seems to be that the idea that they're questions which can be answered on the basis of our mastery of our native language, or our possession of normal human concepts, or perhaps which has to do with the development of new and better concepts for thinking with. In my view, this trend has turned out to be, in the end, a mistake, in the sense that philosophical questions are typically not linguistic or conceptual questions in any distinctive sense, more than the questions of any other discipline. But nevertheless, a great deal of value has been gained from the linguistic turn, because even though we're not asking questions about language, at least in many areas of philosophy, nevertheless, what we are doing is using language to ask questions about the world. But the typical method of philosophy is by formulating subtle arguments. And when argumentation gets subtle, it becomes very hard to tell the difference between valid and invalid reasoning. And often, in order to work out whether someone's argument is valid or invalid, we have to analyze the structure of the argument very carefully. And that involves analyzing the words that they're using and the way in which those words have been put together to make the argument. And so, in that sense, we have to be extremely sensitive to linguistic matters in philosophy, because words are our tools, and the subtleties of words and of grammar are often critical in making the difference between valid and invalid reasoning. But I would compare it to the way in which, for example, if you're an astronomer, you're not fundamentally studying a telescope, but nevertheless, if you say, "Oh, I'm interested in the stars, I'm not interested in the telescope," and so refuse to think about your telescope, you're going to make all sorts of errors in astronomy, because you can only use a telescope effectively and reliably if you have some understanding of how it works. And similarly, in philosophy, we can only use language to argue about the world effectively and reliably if we're very careful about the way in which language works. Well, I was interested in philosophy from quite early on, because there were philosophers in my family, and I was reading about philosophy. So it's something that has just gradually taken over, and it's always struck me as a completely natural way of thinking. Of course, I mean, that may be a perversion of mine, but at any rate, I don't feel that in doing philosophy I'm somehow thinking against the grain of my own intellectual inclinations. One thing I never do is go out for a run. I might go out for a walk. I have a 5-year-old son, and playing with him is a way of not thinking about philosophy. Neither.
I guess.
I wanted to be an archaeologist.
Oh. But you didn't.
No, and the reason, well, what happened was that when I was about 15, I went on an archaeological excavation in Oxford. They were making a new car park and shopping centre, and they discovered a medieval rubbish dump, which they wanted to excavate before they destroyed it. And so I worked on this excavation, and I spent a week with a sort of toothbrush scraping away, and in that week I think I found one little copper pin, and I was actually quite satisfied with that as the result of a week's work. But one thing told me that I was not cut out to be an archaeologist, which was that there was a wooden hut on the site, which was full from floor to ceiling of plastic bags containing completely anonymous bits of medieval pottery, which someone was going to have to piece together and conjecture that some of these bits roughly went with some others. And the sense of more or less physical revulsion that I felt at the messiness of that empirical task told me that my interests were in fact in a completely different direction. It's time for a quick trip to the local Chinese takeaway. No, I'm not that type of person at all. I just wear whatever I can get. Well, it depends what the question is, because for every question to which the right answer is yes, there's another question to which the right answer is no. Nothing is so bad about a little drink. Nothing is so bad about it. Oh, I do that all the time. Nothing at all is bad about enjoying football.
No, we would.
I mean, I think enjoying cricket is even better, but they're false.